Hi, it's Richard here from Intelligent Advisor IT Consulting with another in our regular series about the example projects that are provided with Oracle Policy Modeling. This week we're going to be looking at the Health Diagnosis Project. And as its name suggests, it's based around the idea of self-service or assisted service where someone can diagnose what they think is wrong with them. And aside from the fact that it's a really sweet spot for Oracle policy modeling, it has a couple of nice features in it that we're going to look at. And then we're going to show you how you can use one of those features to extend your own projects and maybe even transform this health diagnosis project into something completely different. But more of that in just a moment. Let's take a look at the project itself. So I'll go over to the example projects and I'll scroll down until I reach health diagnosis. As you can see, it talks about diagnosing eye conditions. That's the standard one. We'll see it in a moment. And the key features include checkboxes, embedded HTML, text and error rules. But really what is the key part to this is there's actually a extension built in JavaScript, which is part of this particular project that we'll take a good hard look at and see how we could customize it or improve upon it. Anyway, I'm going to click on that. Because I've been messing around with it, I'm going to replace the one that I've been working with a brand new copy. I took a backup of the one I want to show you, and I'll remember to bring that back out of the zip file in a little while. So here we are. As you can see, in terms of rules, we have a bunch of errors and warnings and some substitution rules so that we have dynamic text that appears, and then we have the diagnosis and treatment rules themselves. In terms of data model, you can see that everything is on the global entity, and the majority of them are Booleans to identify whether someone has a particular symptom. Do you have discharge from the eye? Do you have burning eyes? And so on. The other attributes are largely dealing with the person themselves, what's their name, and this is a key, is which part of the body is it that is actually hurting. Now in the demo you'll see that out of the box it only handles eye problems, but you could have multiple affected parts of the body and could build in new rules to handle other parts of the body, not just the eyes. The interview itself, fairly straightforward. Let's expand this out into the different stages. So we have an introductory page where you have to acknowledge that this is not a real tool. We have some interesting links here that you could choose to follow to find out where the information came from. And of course, you could update these links, or you could perhaps add new rules based on these links. We ask you for some general information. Basically, is this for you or is it for somebody else? And if it's for somebody else, what's their name and what is the age? Then we come on to what I consider to be the key part of this interview, is the selection of the area of concern. What part of the body are you concerned about today? And you can see that there's a very funny image here, which is supposed to represent a human being. And the goal is that you should be able to click on parts of this to identify where the problem is. Underneath, you will see that if I can come out of the image now, there we go. You will see there's a label underneath which displays the part that you have clicked on. So if I click on the leg, I would expect to see leg. And then there's a drop down here. The drop down is actually containing a list of all of the parts of the body. But this particular drop-down has a custom property, and there's a piece of JavaScript that maintains this as a hidden drop-down. This is because you're going to need the drop-down to be able to identify which part has been selected and potentially then do something based on it, but it doesn't actually need to be displayed. Then we move into what I'll call the actual diagnosis rules, where you say whether you have itchy eyes, burning eyes, redness in the eyes, and so on. And then there's some more details about various sub areas. So there are, for example, if we take a look here, we have, these are the introductory ones, and then we have a number of subsidiary attributes. This one particular is only displayed if you answered yes to one of the previous questions. So fairly typical stuff. Then we have another one for tired eyes if you answered yes to a previous question. And then we come on to some relevant information. Again, this is all dynamically displayed based on your answers. Then we come to the treatment section. So we talk about whether you have any particular existing health conditions. Do you have heart disease? Do you have any of these? And then we, in certain cases, would like to prescribe some eye drops. Of course, you can imagine that this is just another Boolean that is derived from the various yes, no's that you answered. And then finally, we recommend that you go and talk to your health professional while you're waiting for your prescription. Of course, there is no prescription. Nothing's going to be delivered. This is just a demo. So let's take a look at a couple of the interesting rules. I'm going to go into the Rules tab and I'm going to go into Screen Rules. And we'll take a look at this Word document. And we have this one, which is the most important. If you're planning on extending this any further, we have an error rule here that says basically you can't do anything unless you choose to click on or select the eyes as the part of the problem. So if you wanted to extend this, you could add further items to this list or simply remove the error rule and build out all the other different kinds of recommendation and diagnosis for the other body parts. Incidentally, if you're wondering why all of this is in commentary style, this is actually commented out in the as delivered zip. These are old rules that were used in a previous version and are no longer required. So you don't really need to worry about those. When we go down into the diagnosis part, as we discussed earlier, when we look at the diagnosis, we'll see that we have a number of fairly familiar looking rules, a Boolean driven by a number of Booleans, in this case, or disjunctions, or in this case, we have some grouping to say whether we think you have eye strain or not. Very easy to modify and very easy to make similar rules if you're going to do different kinds of diagnosis for different body parts. If I go to the substitution document, the substitution rules are really just to ensure that depending on whether you said the problem is with you or with somebody else, we substitute the right phrase into the labels. So we can say thank you, or we can say thank the other person, or whatever, that sort of stuff. Anyway, back now to the details of this magnificent and very well done. I mean, for a demo, this is really quite something. This picture here. So this is a static image, and this static image is a placeholder, effectively. The placeholder, and it has some custom properties, and it is signifying that there's some JavaScript underneath that's going to look at these custom properties and hopefully use them in some way. So let's go ahead and have a look at those custom JavaScript files, or rather JavaScript file. There is only one. It's called the image extension. So the first thing to be aware of is that this is going to be an image extension. So I'm going to zoom out and I'm going to go to the core part. Here we are. So we have a custom image extension, and you can see that it has basically it's going to implement the code only when it finds one of those custom properties. It's going to create a div, and then it is going to populate the div with a variable called SVG. So one of the things that this demo does, it actually includes the SVG content, so the scalable vector graphic content, as a variable inside this file, which is great for a demo. It's also a useful learning tool because you may not know it, but the SVG itself, as you can see, is XML. So it's great as a learning tool, but frankly, that's a lot of text. And you can imagine that when you get to more complicated to more complicated images, that's going to make a lot of text. It's going to be a little unwieldy, but for the demo, it's absolutely perfect. And then when it comes to the demo, you probably saw this highlight body part. So we're going to colorize a part of the body when you click on it. How are we going to do it? Well, if you look at the SVG, you'll notice that the SVG, you may not know this also, SVGs can have an on-click handler. So you'll see that different areas, different rectangular areas of this image have on-click handlers. And they also have a class. So it's this combination of onClick and class that are going to be used. So the onClick runs a piece of JavaScript called selectPart head. In this case, I would imagine I'm clicking on the head. Down here, you can see I'm clicking on the eyes. And if we come back down to, we're going to select the part, find the part that you've clicked on, and update an attribute to say this is the part you clicked on. Okay, so the attribute ID, in case you're wondering where that came from, the attribute ID is just the other property here. So it's going to update this attribute each time you click on it, which is why we have a label here, which will show you the part that you clicked on. So as you click, this attribute will be updated and the value will be displayed here. And equally, you'll notice that in the highlight body part, once you've selected a part, we will go and get elements by class name. So we will go and grab in the SVG any element that has the correct class name. So in that way, we can select parts of the SVG, and we will change the color. We will update the color, and updating the color basically means changing the fill color of whatever it was you clicked on. So it's a nice couple of tricks. The first one being that SVGs can contain onClick, and SVGs can also have class names associated with different parts of the structure. So we're going to use those to help us identify when you click on something, and then to select the right part so that we can change the color of it. This has some big advantages, but it also has some slight disadvantages. This kind of approach, as it is, only really works when the SVG is inline in the document. So document get elements by class name part eyes. These get element by class name only really work because the SVG is included in the document. If you're going to do it a different way, as we'll see in a moment, you need a slightly different approach. But what does that actually do for us? Well, it means if I go to debug, and I accept the disclaimer, and I say this is for me, I come to my SVG image clickable, and I click on something, and you can see that it changes the color. It also triggers the error because the error message said if you don't click on the eyes, then we're not going to let you play ball. So if I click on the eyes, the error disappears. But I can click on any defined structure within the SVG file using, in this case, it was a bunch of rectangles, so this is really easy to find in the SVG. So you can see the principle as I click also, it identifies the area that I clicked on. And if I just come back to the drop down for a moment, this is the drop down that I mentioned. Let's remove that so the drop down is no longer hidden. You can see that as I'm selecting them, I'm actually selecting from this drop down as well. And the drop down contains all the different rectangles that were defined. So that in itself is a fantastic tool because it demonstrates really, really well three key things. One, that you can create extensions and they can do just about anything you can imagine. And in this case, this is pretty cool. Secondly, they can be interactive. So SVGs have interactivity. And thirdly, is that you can then derive business logic from it. We know that you clicked on the eyes, and that could be driven by a procedure rule to say, well, if you click on the eyes, I'm going to show you another picture, or I'm going to dial Skype, or whatever. It doesn't really matter. Is that this kind of interactivity, you can probably see where I'm going with this. You could adapt this to just about any service-related scenario. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to open up a website and we'll use this as the starting point for where I think it's going to be fun to extend this project. So I've gone to a website called boxy-svg.com. So this is as you can see, an online website that allows you to draw, design, and otherwise manipulate SVGs. The other reason I like it is because it has a variety of demonstrations. So don't worry, I didn't actually write this. I didn't draw this myself. This is one of their demonstrations. Free registration is required to be able to access this, but who cares? It's a wonderful tool, and before long you'll find yourself intrigued by the possibilities of SVGs. So in this particular instance, you can see that I've designed a forklift truck, or rather I haven't designed it, but somebody else did. And my SVG is made up of various chunks, and these chunks as you can probably guess, are going to be elements of structure that are interesting to me, such as the steering wheel, the seat, the forks, the front wheel, the back wheel, the body, and so on. So the idea behind the SVG is that we should be able to identify each item within the structure using a title element. So it's just a plain old HTML title element, which is embedded in the SVG. So you can probably also imagine that this is going to be useful because within the SVG, we can easily find parts of the document by using a title. We can also then export this image to disk as an SVG, and that's what I've done. And let's take a look at what that looks like in real life. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to open up the version of the project that I was working on earlier, which I saved to zip, hopefully. Yeah, we are. Okay. Yep. I gave it a different name, so I didn't overwrite. And when that's shown up, there we go. We'll open up and see what's what. Now, in this particular instance, I decided that we were going to use this forklift truck to demonstrate how to put your own image into the diagnosis tool and also how to make a few changes to make it a little more interesting. So I'm going to go into the interview tab, I'm going to go into styles, I'm going to open up the custom files. So for the purposes of my demo, in my custom files folder, wherever it is, there we go. So I have the same image extension file to begin with. I have some styles, which we'll talk about, well, in fact, one style rule, jQuery, because I'm going to use jQuery for speed in terms of making it easier for me to write the code. And I don't actually think I ended up using this, so we probably remove that. There we go. And in the images, you can see that in the image folder, I have the SVG file. Now, the image in this particular instance doesn't have to be stored locally. I chose to store it locally because I wanted to remind you of something, but this could equally be on a remote server. And that's why I wanted to change how the example script worked so that you could pull the SVG from somewhere else. So let's go and have a look, therefore, at our extension, image extension. First of all, you'll notice that there is no SVG at the top of the file. So there is no big SVG string. A lot of it is similar, but let's go and start off at the beginning. So here we are back at the custom image, and you can probably see here that I'm actually going to use an XML HTTP request. That's not the most efficient way to do this, but it's a good demonstration. I could pull the SVG from another location. In this case, I'm actually pulling it from resources root. Remember that you can use the resources root tag to indicate that you want to pull something out of the resources folder. So in this case, I've said resources root images, so it's going to go and get my forklift SVG. So the SVG file variable will contain the XML, basically, that is contained within my forklift. And if we take a look at that, somewhat larger than the previous file, there we go. I'll open this up with Notepad++. You'll see it's a significantly larger file, so frankly, putting this in the JavaScript file would not have been a good idea, I don't think. Having said that, if we scroll through it, you will notice sooner or later that we have exactly what I was describing when we were looking at the website. You have a title, and we have a class, and we have an onClick. So in that respect, we've identified the same basic principle. We are using a class, and we're using an onClick. So once we've loaded this, much of it is exactly the same. We're going to highlight a body part. And highlighting a body part is slightly different this time around because, of course, we need to make sure that we, first of all, remove any highlighting that was already present. So that's why we grab all the elements and remove the class. My class is called on. Okay, it's not very original, but check to remove any class instances of the on class. And then depending on what you click, add the on class to it. The on class is just a very simple CSS rule that adds a red stroke to it. So anything you click on, it's going to get a red stroke to it. And each time you click on it, we'll take away all the red strokes and then only apply it to the right area. Of course, you could extend this if your document had different components to it. You'll notice that the format here is slightly different because I need to be able to go into the SVG content, find the relevant class. So I've used jQuery for speed here because image click is the name of my div, and then within the div there's an SVG, and within the SVG there are some classes. And then we update the color. In fact, I'm not actually using update color now I think about it. I could probably remove update color without any issues because I'm actually applying the class directly with add class. Which means also that I could probably remove all of these as well. But hey, I'll remove those a little bit later on. So what's the advantages here? First of all, that we're not loading the SVG directly in the JavaScript file. Secondly, that it can come from an external source. It could come from anywhere you like. Thirdly, that you could then have a switch case here that you could take into account all the different varieties of clicks. It's a little easier to read, I think, than the original version. And of course, you could decide on different classes and different colors depending on the different type of object. And that's about it. So what does that actually mean for us in our example? Well, let's debug this. In fact, let's debug it in a browser window so it looks a bit nicer. It's just easier to read, I think, in a browser window. Obviously, I haven't changed anything else in the interview, so it's going to feel a little weird telling me that this is a health diagnosis interview, and then it's going to show me a picture of a forklift. Myself, age 55. That's not my real age, I hasten to add. So here is my truck. And when I select on it, click on it, it says, okay, you select the forks. You can see the red highlight. Now I'm selecting the wheel. Now I'm selecting the wheel. Now I'm selecting the body. Now I'm selecting the seat. Now I'm selecting the steering wheel. Of course, you can see down here I have selected the steering wheel, and I haven't bothered yet to clean up the label that's actually pulling in the original class name rather than the friendly name, front wheels with a space, but you can see the basic principle. So you could use this for identifying anything. It doesn't have to be a body. It's an SVG. They're easy to make. They're easy to understand once you look at the XML inside them, and they're very easy to add interactivity to, because in this case, each time I click on something, I'm actually updating an attribute in Oracle Intelligent Advisor. So that just about wraps it up for our little fun and games with SVGs. Thanks to Health Diagnosis for giving us this opportunity. And if you're interested in obtaining the zip file of this little demo, please just leave a comment in the post or on the YouTube channel if you're watching this on YouTube. And if you liked it, don't forget to say you did. And I'll see you next time for what will be the 9th in our series. Take care. See you later.